This program is intended for informational and educational purposes only. All views and opinions expressed are the views and opinions of the individuals and sponsors presenting them, and not the LTB network. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to another exciting edition of SovereignBTC, your guide to the practical side of everyday Bitcoin use. This is the 10th episode. It's called Into the Mines. You can hear us on the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast network at letstalkbitcoin.com, where you can find other exciting shows like Let's Talk Bitcoin, Ed and Ethan's live Bitcoin report, and Mad Money Machine, among others. I got some great news. We're going to be heard on LRN.FM now. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You can hear the SovereignBTC podcast on LRN.FM. That's the Liberty Radio Network. It's a online station that broadcasts out of Keene, New Hampshire. It's organized by Ian Freeman and some other Free State Project activists, and it can also be heard on several terrestrial radio stations, some low-power FM and pirate radio stations throughout the country, especially in the Northeast. So I'm excited, and I want to give a big welcome to that audience there. You can check us out on their podcast feed. This is our 10th episode. We're cruising along, and Bitcoin's cruising along, a little bit of a rough road. It's been trading around $450. I know my good friend, Dr. Matthew Buckley, was always saying that we might see the bottom at 200 or 300. I said, oh, no, this is just a temporary lull. This was like when it was $600. But just want to throw that word out there, guys. If you're worried about the price, don't sweat it at all. Become a true believer, and you'll realize that Bitcoin is going to the moon. It's only a matter of time, especially when the Bitcoin 2.0 stuff starts to pop off. Bitcoin has immense value, and currency is only the first application. So just have faith, take part in the Bitcoin economy, and help grow the movement. One thing I could tell you, too, a lot of people are holding on to the Bitcoin, and I know it's hard to use them when they're valued so low relative to what they were just a couple months ago. But if you truly want to grow the value of Bitcoin and expand the Bitcoin ecosystem, it's up to you to use those Bitcoins in commerce. Pay someone with them, buy goods or services, use them to donate to nonprofits. Hey, donate some my way at SovereignBTC.com. So I want to give you an intro to the show today. We got a great program lined up for you. We're going to be bringing you the Bitcoin quote of the week, of course. This one comes from Major Payne I-86 on Reddit. It's all about Bitcoin and anarchism, which I see as two peaceful peas in a pod. After that, we're going to hit you with a speech that Jeffrey Tucker delivered at the Texas Bitcoin Conference. There's a bunch of great media that's coming out in the wake of that event, which was awesome, put on by the Texas Bitcoin Association. And Jeffrey Tucker, who always is just so good with words, he really sums up what is so amazing about Bitcoin and how for the first time in recorded history we have this decentralized currency. Really, it's the people's currency. So I'm excited to bring you that speech. We have a couple more that we're going to be bringing you in the coming weeks. One of them from Vitalik Buterin, all about Ethereum. We'll probably do a show all about Bitcoin 2.0 here pretty soon, which I think is one of the most exciting things coming out of the Bitcoin network. And then finally, which we're about to bring you right now, I want to introduce you to a new segment. This is a brand new segment we're going to be bringing to you regularly. It's all about Bitcoin mining, the industry and the game, and we'll explore also the value of Bitcoin mining as it relates to the overall network. It's called Into the Mines. Again, it's brand new, and we're going to bring it to you here on SovereignBTC number 10. So without further ado, folks, here's the new segment on Bitcoin mining called Into the Mines. The arms race for Bitcoin mining hardware is heating up. In this week's SovereignBTC mining report, we take a look at the new 1 terahash class of Bitcoin miners, we explore the wild world of script multi-pools, and we cover some of the backlash coming out of the interwebs over the recent IRS classification of Bitcoin as property. We dive into the implications the ruling has for miners. So put on your hard hats and strap yourself in as we take you into the mines. First, the numbers. At the time of this reporting on March 4th, 2014, Bitcoin is trading at $447 with a high of $455 and a low of $428. Those values courtesy of the Coindesk.com Bitcoin Price Index. The overall network hash rate is 51,377,415 gigahash per second. The current network difficulty level is set at 5,06,860,589. That's up 17.8% from the last difficulty reconfiguration. Into the Mines is brought to you by Bitmain Technology, creators of the Antminer S1 180 gigahash Bitcoin miner. No pre-order, ships on time, and sometimes it's early. Buy yours today at bitmaintech.com. In the wake of the Big Daddy 2 terahash Cointerra machines making their way onto the market, dramatically increasing the difficulty, a new class of 500 gigahash to 1 terahash machines is beginning to emerge. Also, dependable and powerful miners like the Antminer S1 are dropping in price weekly. Today we're going to take a look at the new class of Bitcoin miners that's helping to ensure mining stays decentralized and there's still a place for the little guy. Well, at least for now. First, let's take a look at the Dragon Miner. This is a piece of machinery that comes out of China. There's a couple resale outlets you can get, minersource.net and coinhash.co. This is a 1 terahash machine, and it does 1,000 watts, roughly 1,000 watts. So that equates to 1 watt per gigahash. They're selling for about $3,999 on minersource.net and on coinhash.co. I did see that there's a group buy taking place. At least there was one that took place March 29th, and they were all pulling their money and buying it for around $3,650, likely directly from the outlet there in China. Now, this machine is 28 nanometers, and it has 40 ASIC chips, 40 A1 28 nanometer ASIC chips. They say it can be overclocked to 1.3 terahash or 1,300 gigahash. Again, that machine is selling for $4,000. It's a Dragon Miner. It comes in a cube, sits there in your office. Some people link a Raspberry Pi to it in order to make that work. That's the Dragon Miner. You can get it at minersource.net, coinhash.co. And what was recently made available from Bitmain Tech, bitmaintech.com, that's the Antminer S2. It's a 1 terahash per second machine, delivering 1,000 watts. Just again, this one is selling for $3,600. There's some still available as the time of this reporting, and that are going out on April 10th. That's the second batch of the Antminer. I think Bitmain is a very reputable and dependable company who often delivers early, and they're certainly on time. Great competitive price. Now that's also going to be 1 watt per gigahash and $3.60 per gigahash as well, compared to the $4 per gigahash with the Dragon Miner machines. So there's also some other options out there that I came across. There's a Fast Hash 1 Prospector. This particular piece of machinery is also 28 nanometers. It does 512 gigahash, and it's actually a mining card. It plugs in through USB. It is immediately available. They're selling for $2,000 a piece, so effectively you can get 1,024 gigahash for around $4,000. Now, I did read somewhere on some forums that there was a coupon that was available. I'm not sure if it still is at the time of this recording, but that made that piece of equipment $1,500. So effectively, you could get over 1 terahash for $3,000, which would bring you out to $3 a gigahash, which is a wonderful rate. Right now, it's about $3.90 a gigahash. Now, that machine, which sets it apart from some of the others, besides that outstanding price, it's actually 0.7 watts per gigahash. So that's going to outcompete the previous machines that we were chatting about. Now, there's also another option that many people are taking advantage of right now, and that's the good old Antminer S1, also from Bitmain Tech. This is a powerful machine. They boast that it controlled 20% of the mining network. Maybe I shouldn't say controlled, but contributed about 20% to the overall hash rate of the entire Bitcoin mining network, which sounds pretty incredible. The Antminer S1 is a very reliable machine. It's rather quiet. It's a standalone machine like the other ones. They do have a 90-day warranty on it as well. Now, just less than a month ago, these machines were selling for $700. I recall Yoshi of Bitmain being there at the Texas Bitcoin Conference. Since then and before then, the price was dropping consistently, all the way down to 0.893 Bitcoin. They pegged it to Bitcoin, and they've been dropping it weekly, or more often than weekly. Now, at this point, the machine is selling for less than $400 with Bitcoin below $450. and it's 2 watts a gigahash. Unlike the other ones, it's twice as power consuming, but at a price like that, it may be a better investment, some people may say. That comes out to $2.20 per gigahash. But again, it's 2 watts per gigahash. You'll have to determine what the balance is on that front. Many people are setting up these S1s en masse to try to compete with these 2 terahash and 1 terahash machines. You just got to pay attention to the power. However, one strategy that many miners take advantage of is using the equipment till they get ROI or before then, and then turning around and reselling it on eBay or Craigslist. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There's a new class of these mining machines emerging on the market that are 1 terahash and below that are becoming more and more affordable. You got the Fast Hash 1 Prospector, which sells for $2,000. It's 512 gigahash. Get yourself 2 of those. You're up to over 1 terahash. You have the Bitmain S2, which was released recently. There's good reports coming in on it that it's working very well. I should say, for full disclosure, Bitmain is one of the sponsors of the SovereignBTC podcast. The second batch is available now, and it should be shipping April 10th. Of course, you want to check bitmaintech.com to see if that's still available. We recorded this on Sunday, April 4th. And then you have the Dragon Miner, which are widely available all across the internet. There's multiple resellers. There's people selling them privately in the forums. Those are selling for $4,000 from minersource.net and coinhash.co. Moving on, we're going to chat about a new phenomenon in the Bitcoin game. At least it's new to me. I just recently was made aware of it, but I get the impression it has been around for very long. That's pool switching, or multi-pools, as they're referred to. Now, this is mainly a script coin phenomenon, a script altcoin, and essentially how it works is it allows you to sign up with a particular pool. Some of them even just have you put your Bitcoin address as your worker name. You don't have to sign up for anything. And what takes place is this pool, or the pool organizer, goes through and switches what coin the pool is pointed at, depending on which coin is most profitable. It's a profitability picker, and they are actually paying out consistently a higher profitability than Litecoin. Some of them 110% of Litecoin, 120, 130% of Litecoin. Now, there's a whole slew of these technologies that are out there and available. Middlecoin is one of the more popular ones. Clever Mining is a new one that's pretty profitable. Waffle Pool is out there, which seems to be pretty simple. Hashcows, CoinShift, LTC, WeMineAll, which is a subsidiary of WeMine Litecoin. There's also Script Guild that was recently released in beta fashion. That is the counterpart to BTC Guild, which is one of the most popular, most powerful hashing pools out there. They now have a script coin counterpart that does pool switching and multi-pool with script. Now, again, you could check out poolpicker.eu. This is a website that compares the various multi-pools to show you which one is currently the most profitable according to the day, all the way back to the 27-day average. It's a wonderful tool if you are looking to use this particular technology in order to increase your profitability. Now, there are some problems that are associated with this, and some people take this pretty seriously. They believe that these multi-pools, these pool switching pools and groups, are going to be the death of altcoins. What happens is the pool gets pointed at a profitable altcoin, something that's rising in profitability, and immediately hundreds of gigahash is thrown onto this small network, dramatically increasing the difficulty. And then when they determine that it's no longer as profitable as the next coin, some of these pools pull out, and the altcoin is left with a very high difficulty. And most times the miners that are true to that coin, their heart's in that coin, they're not able to keep up. Now, I see this as a problem. Recently, there were some problems with Dogecoin. Apparently, these multi-pools were taking advantage. Some would see it that way, some would not. Taking advantage of the fact that Dogecoin has random rewards for each block. And they were going out and snagging up the higher reward blocks, leaving the smaller reward blocks for the smaller miners and the non-switch pools. That created some problems. Well, thankfully, we have an institution and a system that can self-regulate and that has the ability to evolve and go with the flow. There was a recent Dogecoin fork in the blockchain. Now we have Dogecoin 1.6. Now what they did was they abandoned the random coin reward setup and they went ahead and mixed in a standard of 250,000 coins. So this helped to alleviate the problem. They're also working with something called DigiShield. Now this is a wonderful solution to overcome the problem of the increasing difficulty with these multi-pools and then the pool moving out and leaving the first miners who are passionate about that coin with a strong difficulty, sometimes killing the coin altogether. This program, DigiShield, immediately reconfigures the network difficulty to go back down, so they're not left with a period, 10 to 12 days, shorter periods with some of these altcoins, where the miners that are passionate, that are into that coin, that are committed to that coin, aren't able to mine at all because the difficulties become so difficult. So that's called DigiShield, and that's one of the wonderful innovations of Dogecoin. This is something that Dogecoin has that other coins don't, and it's one of the reasons why I believe Dogecoin is a wonderful altcoin for people to be into, for people to mine, holding a Litecoin, Dogecoin. And then if you want to get into these multi-pools, these pool switchers, they happen to be more profitable than some of the other options. But be aware, sometimes you might be screwing with a network. Some people think that this actually assists rising altcoins in having the hashing power necessary in order to take their coin to the next level. Some people disagree and think that it just goes in and jacks up the difficulty. But thankfully, there's innovative solutions like DigiShield to deal with that. Next on Into the Mines, we're going to look at the recent IRS ruling and how it relates to Bitcoin mining, and we're going to explore a few articles and quotes that I found that cover this topic as well. First of all, there's an article here, Why the IRS is Wrong on Taxation of Bitcoin Mining. This is by William D. Lewis. He starts by going over parts of Notice 2014-21, which was issued on March 25th, 2014. Of course, this was the IRS ruling that stated Bitcoin is to be treated as a property rather than a currency. One of the questions, question number 8 on this particular memorandum, is about Bitcoin mining. It says, does a taxpayer who mines virtual currency realize gross income upon receipt of the virtual currency resulting from those activities? And the answer is yes. When a taxpayer successfully mines virtual currency, the fair market value of the virtual currency at the date of receipt is includable in gross income. And now this goes on to the article here by this gentleman named William D. Lewis. This means that the IRS has taken the position that a person who mines virtual currency is being paid in virtual currency for the service of mining virtual currency, rather than the person has produced virtual currency, a piece of property, through capital-intensive number crunching. What is the process of virtual currency mining? The way that I conceive of the process of virtual currency mining, using the example of Bitcoin, is that when a block is discovered, a number of Bitcoin is created. The pool that discovers the block retains the Bitcoins, and the pool distributes the Bitcoins according to each member's contributions to solving the block. So it's not like you're getting paid for providing services to someone else. It's more like you're creating property, Bitcoins, through capital-intensive effort, solving math problems with expensive computers. If the IRS says that they're going to tax virtual currency according to the principles of property taxation, then virtual currency miners should only be taxed when there is a realization event and not when they produce a unit of virtual currency. The scope of this problem is immense. In the past year, approximately 1.5 million Bitcoins have been mined. I'm going to estimate an average price per Bitcoin of $300 over the past year. If we assume that all Bitcoin miners are subject to U.S. tax, then that represents $450 million in additional taxable income over the past year without any of the subsequent realization events. At a 25% tax rate, the Department of the Treasury has just raised $112.5 million in tax revenue from the production of something. The tax code doesn't work this way. The taxation of copper or gold mining does not work this way. I cannot fathom why they decided to do this. Next, we're going to read a little excerpt from another article. This is called Taxing the Bitcoin Miners. It's by Bob Derber. Many tax professionals, such as myself, felt the Coinbase portion of the mining award was akin to the creation of an intangible asset, and the transaction fees was income for services in performing the mining effort. This approach meant that the Coinbase was not logically taxed at the time of the mining award, but rather when the Bitcoin was sold. In this approach as well, mining expenses were not currently deductible, but were rather capitalized in the Coinbase award as a component of the basis in Bitcoin. Basis being the cost, if you will, used to determine gain or loss when we ultimately sold the Bitcoin. But the IRS has come to a significantly different position by stating that the Coinbase is immediately taxable. So if you as a miner mined Bitcoin in 2013, it will be taxed as 2013 income. Your tax will be determined using the value of the Coinbase when it was earned. This may not be material for those who earned a Coinbase when Bitcoin was $13 in March a year ago. It may be entirely different if you earned a Coinbase in November when Bitcoin was trading at $1,000. And finally, to close out this segment here on the IRS ruling, this is from a Reddit user named Twisted Word. Now, this is a different view entirely from the tax attorney and the other gentleman we just read the excerpt from. This one's a little bit more passionate and shows the personal side of Bitcoin, especially when it comes to the government trying to take your Bitcoin. He says, "Are you kidding me? So someone like me bringing in less than $1 a day, I need to pay effing taxes on that? Not being able to pay taxes in Bitcoin, that essentially is a heavier tax levied against my real income for my real job. That is effing BS. On the scale I'm mining, that is like taxing me for picking up change on the ground. So that is essentially a loss I'm taking buying equipment, and now a second loss because my regular job's paycheck is now subject to a heavier tax cut. I'm likely never to see a profit on my mining investment unless Bitcoin prices skyrocket, in which case that is a capital gain. Why the hell am I being taxed on that tiny insignificant return now as income? I'm perfectly willing to pay capital gains tax on huge valuation increases in the future, but F you if you expect me to fork over almost half of the 97 cents I make a day now, not to mention half of what comes in as the difficulty increases when that happens, and then again and again. This is effing asinine and a complete roadblock set up against small miners just throwing hash power up as a hobby or to help push the attitude of a smaller decentralized mining network." There you have it. Twisted Word on Reddit is not happy about the taxation regulations about virtual currencies and Bitcoin mining. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed our first edition of Into the Mines, the Bitcoin mining report on SovereignBTC. And until we chat with you again, happy mining. Hope you liked it. Again, that's going to be a regular segment. We're going to be launching a Bitcoin news service. I'm not going to tell you the name, but I'm not going to tell you when we're going to launch it either, but it's coming up soon, and we're going to have all sorts of awesome little segments like this that are regular and recurring in addition to a 5-minute regular news service. It's going to be kind of like the Liberty Beat. You can find it at thelibertybeat.com, and there's going to be recurring information about the Bitcoin mining game, and we're going to be bringing you Into the Mines. It'll also be featured here on the Sovereign BTC show, so I'll have you wait in anticipation for that excitement to roll around. Let's go ahead and move into this week's Bitcoin quote of the week. This one comes from a Reddit user, Major Pain I86, and the title of his post was "Thank you, fellow anarchists." This was on Friday, April 3rd. He says, "You will be the ones that will let Bitcoin live forever. No matter what any government does, you will continue to believe and use this decentralizing technology that at its core promotes liberty and destroys hierarchy. Oh, by the way, F the state." And there's, of course, a little exclamation point. It's funny, I came across this and I took note of it and I went back to find it, and he had actually edited out the little statement, the F the state. It says, "Edit, remove the section that offended some people's sensitivities," which I guess was rather kind of him. People don't like to use curse words, but you know what offends my sensitivities? The fact that an institution exists that coerces millions and millions of people daily and has entire populations living in fear, that's capable of leeching money off of the masses and using it to fund foreign wars of aggression, to engage in genocide, to oppress the masses, to benefit the big guy at the expense of the little guy. That offends my sensitivities, and that's part of the reason why I appreciate Major Pain I86 and his sentiment. I want to give the same thank you to those out there who are thumbing their nose at the man and realize that Bitcoin is a true technology that can disrupt the status quo of monopoly, hierarchy, coercion, and control. And I think it's really excellent that there's people out there putting themselves at risk who are willing to, no matter the cost, no matter the stakes, no matter the regulation, no matter the ruling, use the coin as it was intended to be used in a decentralized, non-centralized, non-coercive manner. And I think that Bitcoin's going to be okay. No matter what any government does, it's going to be easier to skirt the man than using other currencies. So here's to Bitcoin, and here's to Major Pain I86. And now we're going to play a speech by Jeffrey Tucker himself. He's one of my favorite Bitcoin proponents, good friend of mine. Really, you guys just got good energy. If you ever met him at one of these Bitcoin conferences, if you haven't met him, he's very approachable. Talk to Jeffrey Tucker. He's the man, the best dressed man in the Bitcoin movement. This was a speech that he delivered. I actually had the pleasure of introducing him. That was something we played for you a couple podcasts ago. I introduced him, and he went on to deliver an awesome and eloquent speech about really how amazing Bitcoin truly is. You really got to take hold of what it is that we're onto right here and understand the power that it has to disrupt the status quo of control and coercion and hierarchy and monarchy. It's truly incredible, and it's no wonder governments across the world are starting to crack down. But again, Bitcoin is resilient, and if anything, Bitcoin has demonstrated that relative to other mediums of exchanges, relative to other technologies, there's really no holding Bitcoin down, and there's no holding Jeffrey Tucker down, because he's into Bitcoin, and I'm into Bitcoin, and I'm into Jeffrey Tucker, and I'm into freedom. Love all three of them, and Jeffrey talks about some of those things in his speech. Here it is, folks. This is from the Texas Bitcoin Conference, which took place on March 5th and 6th. This is Jeffrey Tucker on the amazement of Bitcoin.
Jeffrey Tucker is going to be speaking. Jeffrey Tucker is a anarcho-capitalist. He's worked with the Laissez-Faire books, Mises as well, and he just recently launched Liberty.me, which is another great example of a decentralized peer-to-peer network. It's doing its own publishing. It's a social media outlet. This thing's going to be huge, and I'm so excited that Jeffrey Tucker is excited about Bitcoin. I think he's one of the most valuable proponents out there for this decentralized cryptocurrency, and he's going to talk about Bitcoin today and share his love of that cryptocurrency with us. Jeffrey Tucker, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. So can you hear me okay? Yeah, this works, doesn't it? Right. So thank you, John. John is in many ways my teacher, the man who radicalized me in many areas of life. I thought I was an extremist until I met him. And then now I feel like a moderate, like whatever. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about is something that people don't often talk about in this space, which is Bitcoin as a monetary technology, by which I mean a replacement for national monetary policy. It's a little bit of a strange topic because you have to understand that like 5 years ago, nobody would have imagined that anybody would even be talking like this. It was inconceivable that there'd be something that would emerge from the market economy itself that would actually challenge the government monopoly over money, which we've taken for granted for a very long time. 100 years of monetary socialism or monetary nationalism that's been unimpeded. We don't really know what it's like to have a market in the production of money itself. This is a rather important subject because, as the cliche goes, money constitutes half of every economic transaction. It does become an important matter if all governments in the world basically control half of all economic exchanges by default, by ownership. And it's a little strange how we've sort of gotten used to this. And I understand why. It's been so long since we've ever experienced anything like a market. Most of us have no knowledge of or understanding of how it would actually work. The widespread presumption in all economics literature and in all of policy life is that the government controls the money. I mean, that's the way it's always been. I mean, it's been that way for more or less hundreds of years, but especially for the last 100 years. So there has arisen around the issue of national money a gigantic scientific apparatus, right? So we have dozens of journals dedicated to monetary policy and banking policy and monetary science and the science of central planning with the money. Thousands of economists employed by the Fed alone, but in the Treasury Department, monetary economists teaching universities all over the world. None of which existed in the 19th century. You have to understand. I mean, this whole notion that you can centrally plan a monetary policy using high-level science was not, something anybody considered in the 19th century. In the 19th century, monetary debates were basically, is your money going to be sound and solid, based in commodity and real, or is it going to be corrupt and inflationary, and therefore leading to booms and busts and fueling rackets and mercantilism and all this kind of stuff. This was basically the debate. It was a debate over, morality more than anything else, really. Corruption meant paper money, and soundness and freedom meant commodity money. Then suddenly, in the early part of the 20th century, we got this thing called the Federal Reserve. Now, it just so happened that the Federal Reserve nationalized money, basically. It could have happened to any good. So you might think about this for a second. Let's say, for example, that there was a very large shoe industry in the late 19th century that kept finding itself in a whole series of financial crises and basically lobbied the federal government at some point to create a national shoe policy with a national shoe repositories and with the shoes were too big to fail or what, I don't know what, but you had a policy surrounding this, and all private productions of shoes just kind of went away, and everybody who made shoes had to register, they had to be approved, they had to be part of some big grand project, they had to be part of the national ethos. It became very important to the country what kind of shoes we wore, and a whole scientific establishment sort of grew up around national shoe policy. I mean, this would happen. It would happen if the government had taken over the shoe industry in the same way that it's happened to money. And after a while, everybody would forget how shoes could ever be managed by the market. Anybody who suggested such a thing would be considered completely crazy. And until maybe one guy makes a private shoe and he holds it up to the world and says, here's how I made it, and gave the instructions to everybody, and gradually over 5 years, everything kind of lost control, and pretty soon, the national shoe industry, is under strain. That's basically what we're seeing today with money. So, but when the Fed was created, there were two levels to the Fed. There was on one hand the scientific gloss, the claim that only by national monetary management will we be able to get unemployment under control, inflation under control, calm down business cycles, in the problem of wildcat banking, bring stability and rationality to the sector. And all this is the scientific rationale. On the other hand, there's an underlying reality that was really going on with the creation of the Fed, which was basically that a banking industry that had been constantly under threat, under fire, because it had was always faced with insolvency because it was overexpanding beyond a point at which it could be sustained by the markets. It was always involved in government rackets and cooperating with governments buying their debts and inflating on top of those government debts using them as assets, and then inflation would turn into a business cycle, and then there'd be runs on the bank. Well, the banks were tired of this, right? So throughout the late 19th century, we saw ever more consolidation in the banking industry, and then finally in 1907 was the last straw. There's a big panic. A lot of depositors lost their money. The banks went to the government, and basically a big deal was made. A big cooperative racket was pulled off, where essentially the banking industry agreed to fund the government's projects forever, in exchange for which it would get bailout guarantees from the government, and also crush banking competition. This is a big factor here in the creation of the Fed. The major big players in the industry put together a regulatory system to squeeze out the smaller players and not have to face that kind of banking competition. So that was the whole idea of the Federal Reserve. So you have on one hand a scientific rationale for the thing, and then on the other hand an underlying reality, which is basically the usual scams that government's always running. So, and that's the way it's existed ever since. So there were three big phases in the 20th century to this great monetary nationalist experiment. Now, of course, private currency just went away throughout the 20th century. I mean, even in the late 19th century, there's evidence that there was still private creation of money here and there. But this came to an end in the 20th century. And one of the big trends we saw from 1913 all the way up till the end of the 20th century was the elimination of all commodity backing. I mean, what started off as being more or less a gold standard, ended at the end of the day with just a big paper money system with unlimited supply creation and unlimited ability of government to use money to fund itself. So we saw monetary policy take place in three great phases in the 20th century. The first one was the deployment stage, where the central bank was used for what it was intended for, namely to fund a massive expansion of government beyond which governments could ever tax their citizens. I mean, you understand, if there hadn't been a Fed, the U.S. never would have entered into World War I. I mean, there's no chance. That would have never happened. In fact, if there hadn't been a German central bank, there would have been no war in Europe either. I mean, governments simply cannot tax their citizens that much. People get angry, and they revolt. So central banks actually free governments from the burden of having to collect taxes from their citizens. So that was the very first great way that the central bank was used, was to kill people, basically. And draft people, and to run a big central plan, and jail people who disagreed, to set prices, to vastly expand the public sector at the expense of human freedom. That was the very first use of the Federal Reserve. That's what it did, and that's what it was for. And then we saw between the period of 1913 and sort of 1920, a gigantic expansion of government in other areas, whether it's antitrust policy, the first creation of the public sector welfare states, huge expansion of public schooling and educational funding, consolidation of a global empire. All these things were made possible solely by the existence of the central bank. This is the Great Consolidation period. Run scientifically, right? Well, did it work? Not really. I mean, there were continued to be ever more waves of inflation, deflation, business cycles, instabilities. It didn't get rid of those things at all, but it did actually make the expansion of government possible and the consolidation of the industry assured, protected against competition. The whole experiment came crashing down in 1929. After a decade of unrelenting expansion of money. It's a very interesting thing. When Satoshi Nakamoto set up to create Bitcoin, I mean, what was his great contribution, right? I mean, what was the great innovation of Bitcoin? It solved the problem of double spending, right? You have to solve that problem. Well, governments don't consider this a problem, actually. Double spending is the essence of monetary policy, That's the way it works, right? Satoshi knew that he had to solve the problem or else nobody would ever accept a Bitcoin. I mean, governments don't face this problem. This is the essence of monetary policy is double spending for them. It's the ability to create infinite amounts of currency. Okay, the system broke down in 1929. And so how did governments respond to this? Well, first there was the Hoover administration, which attempted to bail out the banks and massively lower interest rates and inflate the economy. The problem was, and FDR faced that same problem, there was such a massive debt overhang, it was not possible for the Federal Reserve to inflate. They kept trying and trying and trying. There's a little bit of a myth out there that Hoover was negligent, and that we inadvertently let the banks fail when we should have bailed them out. The Great Depression says, no, that's true, actually. They tried desperately to bail out the whole system, but the debt overhang was so extreme, the pressure for deleveraging was so intense, there was nothing the central bank could do about it. So monetary policy completely failed. What did FDR do, finally? Well, he declared a banking holiday and collected everybody's gold. It's unbelievable, actually. Basically made private ownership of gold illegal and depreciated the money. So just reset it back, robbed everybody in the country. I mean, this was the great failure of central banking. It wasn't the failure of capitalism. I mean, it was the ultimate failure of central banking. It stopped working at that point in history. You have to fast forward now through. I mean, it's very strange to me that people think that this somehow got us out of the Depression. Well, the Depression lasted for like 10 years until the next thing you know, we're slaughtering people again in World War II. Thanks again to the central bank, none of which would have happened without the Fed. So this is, a dramatic failure. This was not anybody's success of central banking. This is a period of consolidation of central banking, but it represented a calamitous failure. After World War II, we saw the Keynesian economics now, the Keynesians who had learned their monetary policy as studying under the John Maynard Keynes' general theory, had a view that monetary policy could be used for a lot more than just consolidating a banking industry or funding wars or stabilizing the economy or anything like that. I mean, what Keynes imagined monetary policy would do is that it would work together with fiscal policy to create a massive apparatus of macroeconomic planning, so that we could guarantee certain high rates of growth. We could carefully calibrate the difference between unemployment and inflation. It was just like one gigantic lever that lived at the Federal Reserve in Washington. You would pull it this way, you would pull it that way. You had to hire the right experts. Ideally, this would happen on a global level, and this is what they did after World War II. All the Keynes and all of the Keynesians from all over the world got together with all the statesmen and the Treasury officials, and they cobbled together a new monetary system called the Bretton Woods system, which is supposed to be the ultimate answer. It's the great scientific answer. We've been hearing this for a century, that, now we have the ultimate scientific answer to the money problem. Right? Every time they come up with a new system, and every time it's failed. Well, this whole system fell apart in the late 1960s. Once again, governments expanded money supply too much and expanded their spending too much. The debt overhang became too intense. The gold outflows became extreme to the point that Richard Nixon had to shut the gold window This represented the final failure of the whole monetary policy system. The whole thing had finally unraveled. The system they cobbled together in 1913 was basically dead by 1973. So what's been happening since 1973? Well, this is the complete unraveling. This has been the period in which monetary policy completely stopped working. And there's several things that are very important here for you to understand. One is that by the mid-1970s, the Keynesian system stopped working, right? We were never supposed to have inflation and unemployment at the same time. We did, okay? So that it just refutes Keynesianism on the face of it. Then we saw a massive, basically, a very high inflation, almost hyperinflation in the late 1970s that gutted all the capital stock and savings of Americans. It was a wholesale looting of property in the late 1970s. Inflation got up finally to 13%. If price controls weren't able to control it, this is the final concession. Richard Nixon's great new solution did not work. By 1981, in the early 1980s, we got a thing called financial deregulation, at which point monetary policy ceased to work at all. The Fed hasn't really been able to control the national money supply since the early 1980s at all. I mean, they push buttons, they try to do things. We've seen this over the last 5 years, right? I mean, the Fed has been desperately trying to generate an inflation. It's been unable to do it. It's tried to generate economic growth by driving interest rates to zero. It's been unable to do it. There's very little part of the money supply the Fed can even control. It can't even count anymore how much money there is. Nobody really knows. Try to figure out, like, how many dollars are there? I mean, the Fed has so many different measures, and about every 6 months they get rid of one and introduce another, So it's anybody's guess. I mean, this system is essentially so broken that no longer has the plausibility of science to it anymore. And what's fascinating to me is that just the way in which this national monetary system has so corrupted the intellectual class. It's like people stopped imagining the possibility that markets could manage money. I mean, like, nobody really thought of this. As far as I can tell, we know that the monetarists, imagine an ideal system where money would expand 3% a year or something like that. Well, you can't do that when you don't even know how much money there is, and you don't have the mechanisms of control to expand or shrink. You don't have those things anymore, and you haven't since the early 1980s. That whole plan is busted. We know that Keynesianism is completely busted. It never really worked in the first place, but it's just completely implausible when you have no mechanisms whatsoever, and the mechanisms you think you do have don't work. But even the Austrians, they're the great competitor to the Keynesians and the monetarists themselves, were routinely asked, well, what would you do if you were in charge? Well, we would institute a gold standard. We would expand it, based on the profitability of gold mining. We would have 100% reserves, or maybe we would have free banking or whatever. A whole series of plans that the Austrians themselves imagined that they had for how to manage national money under a kind of a sound money system. Well, what hardly anybody imagined, and I would make one exception here for F.A. Hayek, because as far as I can tell, he's the only one that really imagined such a thing as Bitcoin ever existing. Nobody imagined that the system could actually be recreated from the bottom up. So what have we learned? I mean, think about what happened. And let me just quickly tell the story of where Bitcoin came from, just so that, as often as I've told the story, people are always surprised to learn. So what happened was in 2008, because house prices were under pressure, and the whole shadow banking system, which has actually emerged since the early 1980s, which is far vaster, much bigger than the official banking system, it was so highly leveraged with mortgage-backed securities that all their models turned upside down. All the largest security firms in the United States, threatening to topple the entire system. Now, how bad was it? How close were we to ruin in 2008? I don't really know for sure, but at the time, the president was George Bush, right? George W. Bush, right? And he basically told everybody, look, we've got to have this hundreds of $billion bailout with TARP, or it's going to be a disaster. You're going to go to your cash machine, and not getting any cash. There's not going to be any coming out. You're going to go through the grocery store, and probably the shelves are going to be completely empty. Ships will not be able to leave their harbors because they won't be able to get the bonded insurance. Essentially, everything about our lives is at stake here. We've got to have this gigantic bailout. Well, this is a weird kind of system. I mean, after a century of scientific planning and monetary policy, for house prices to fall, 10, 20%, and threaten the entire global monetary financial system, I mean, this is not a very robust system here, right? This is not a very good way to go about things. So Satoshi, what he did was, he was watching this whole thing take place and thought, well, heck, let's just reinvent money for the digital age in a way that's sound and solid and replicates something like the old-fashioned gold standard, and which is essentially what Bitcoin is. Now, this immediately poses a problem for anybody schooled in monetary economics. And this is, I guess, to me, what's so interesting about Bitcoin, is what it's taught us. We thought we knew, but we didn't really know. So what he showed was that it was possible to generate a sound money, out of computer code, provided the protocol was beautifully structured. We had previously believed that money always had to emerge out of a commodity system, a system of barter. This is why I was initially so skeptical of Bitcoin. I mean, I didn't believe it could actually be true, because I had always thought that money had to emerge out of barter exchange. I mean, lots of people claim that this was what Ludwig von Mises himself taught in his great book, Theory of Money and Credit from 1912, the great monetary treatise, right, that warned against central banking. So how did it come to be that Bitcoin obtained its first value? Well, let's just say that instead of emerging out of commodity exchange, the money value of the the monetary value of the unit of exchange came not out of a commodity, but out of a service. And what is that service? In the case of Bitcoin, it's just a beautiful and elegant payment system, which is exactly how it was introduced into the world. I mean, the white paper comes out in what? October. The Genesis block emerges in the first week of January. What's its value? What's the value of the unit of exchange when it first goes out into the market? Introduced into a free forum. Anybody can download it, anybody can look at it. Senate Banking Committee never gave permission for this. Nobody asked Bernanke. It was never discussed in the economics journals. The Journal of Monetary Economics never had an article about it. It was just thrown out in a free forum. And what was the value of the currency? It was zero, right? Nothing. But 8 months went by when people were able to play with the system. And what were they playing with? They're playing with the blockchain, playing with the peer-to-peer system of exchanging property titles back and forth. And over the course of 8 months, people gradually discovered that it worked. And that's kind of amazing. So that began the process of the valuation of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin becomes the unit of account for the deployment of this great payment system. In other words, what I'm arguing here is that the basis of Bitcoin's value itself is in the blockchain. It's in the payment system. It's not that Bitcoin as a unit somehow, has its own independent value. If you could somehow subtract Bitcoin away from the blockchain, the peer-to-peer system, and the distributed network, it would be as valueless as any other computer code. It would not mean anything. So its value, its commodity value, as it were, is really a service value. It's the blockchain itself. Now, this is an incredible revelation to anybody who studied monetary economics. What it basically does is it blows up a century of monetary theory. It just blows it up. I mean, you can't read anything written over the last 100 years on this subject, with the exception of one essay by F.A. Hayek, that makes any sense of Bitcoin. That's an amazing thing. That's how revolutionary this is. And the superiority of it, you only have to use it one time to suddenly realize, oh my God, what have we been missing? What we've been missing is the forces of markets and competition and private enterprise and creativity and genius applied to the realm of money. This is essentially what happens when you put governments in charge of anything. As I said, you could do it with shoes, you could do it with carrots, whatever you put government in charge of, for 100 years is going to be pretty crappy after 100 years. It's going to be terrible. And that's essentially what happened. So one of the reasons all of us in this room are amazed by what we're seeing, it's not that Bitcoin itself is sort of unnaturally incredible. It's just that it's the first real attempt to put an end to a static, government-controlled, overly bureaucratized, hacked system that has stopped working for the modern age. I mean, the dollar is the equivalent of a car from 1913 or a telephone from 1913. It would be like if we still had the same kinds of methods of food productions from 1913. I mean, it's a thrown-back, reactionary anachronism that never kept with the times. And that's why Bitcoin is so amazing to us. I mean, it's like we've been asleep for 100 years, and we've woken up to new realities. I mean, Bitcoin's probably not any more amazing than a cell phone or the internet or email or Google Chat or anything else. It's just that it's applied to money. And it's blowing our minds because we've not been allowed to see what markets could do. So what has it taught us? Well, as I say, it's taught us that almost everything we thought we knew was wrong. And I'd like to see a little bit of humility on the part of economists, actually, every once in a while in a lot of this. You know, sometimes you have to look out the window, get your head out of the books, and actually learn from what's going on out there. And I think this applies not just to Paul Krugman, but to, but also to there are many people who are friends of mine who imagine themselves to be free market economists who still maintain that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme. It can't be true. It's all a lie. So these arguments. I mean, I was just at the Bitcoin Center in New York and had a nice debate with my friend Andrew Schiff, over this whole subject, and who continues to be very confused by it. And I understand why people ask questions about Bitcoin. I mean, it's a complicated technology. I mean, what does it require that you understand? If you want to understand, you don't have to understand it really, but if you want to understand it, you have to understand something about cryptography, monetary theory, peer-to-peer networks, distributed networks, open source software development. There's a lot that has to go into trying to figure it out, right? I mean, it's a little bit complicated. But, electricity is complicated. And we don't have to think about that every time we come into a room and turn on the lights, right? So that's where we're headed towards. That's where I think the future is going to be. People are not going to have to worry about all the complicated technology that obsesses us in this room. We're just going to use it as a regular currency. Let me just finish up with some final speculations on the future here, because it's a little confusing. We've never actually lived through any period in which national monies are replaced by a globally viable cryptocurrency, generated through distributed networks. I mean, we don't actually know anything about the subject. There's really no historical precedent for it. But I would suggest that we all need to prepare ourselves for a great deal of upheaval. Things like what happened the other day with Mt. Gox, it's just the beginning. We're going to see ever more of this. And if governments get heavily involved in the regulation of Bitcoin, it's going to get way worse. I mean, there will always be private scams and private scandals and businesses that come and go. It's true in the railroad industry, too, when railroads came along. But if governments get overly involved in the Bitcoin space, it's going to be, the corruption you will never, is going to make Mt. Gox look like just the beginning. And this is what happened in the railroad industry. I mean, government got involved in railroads to stop the problems of late trains and exploitation of workers and badly built bridges and these kinds of things. And the result of government involvement in the railroad industry was the worst corruption we ever saw, in the whole of the 19th century. So this is definitely what's going to happen if government gets overly involved. But even if it stays out, we're going to continue to see firms come and firms go. Don't panic. Everybody I knew in the Bitcoin space knew that Mt. Gox was a disaster. I mean, people were warning against it for 2 years. I myself, in all my writings about the subject, warned people to stay away from this company. We couldn't wait for it to go away. I have no animus towards these nice people, but it was just badly run, and it had been for a couple of years, or 3 years or 4 years, and everybody kind of knew that. So we'll see more of this kind of stuff. At the same time, we're going to see continuing rates of adoption. It's going to be incredible. I mean, even at this event, when you look at the number of vendors that are displaying here, I mean, Most of these people didn't even exist 12 months ago. I mean, the infrastructure growing up around Bitcoin is exploding at a pace that's just beyond belief. As I say, history has been on hold for 100 years, and it's just now blasting open. We're starting to see what's possible. So in the future, I mean, we're definitely going to see parallel monetary systems emerging. One, a crypto monetary system. I'm not annoyed by altcoins at all. I had a nice debate with my friend Daniel Krawitz the other day. He's a Bitcoin patriot, whereas I'm a big fan of every kind of quirky coin you can name. I like them all. I have no problems with any of those things. We're going to see parallel currency systems, cryptocurrency existing side by side with national currencies in every country in the world, but we're also going to see continuing parallel systems within the cryptocurrency world. We already see there's 10,000 altcoins existing. They'll continue to rise and fall. There will be pump and dump schemes. There will be scams all over the place. People are going to lose their shirts. It's going to be monetary competition. On the other hand, it's going to be very good for Bitcoin and for whatever coin is going to lead the pack, because we've now got an alpha beta staging live system of testing and gradual improvement on money. Imagine that, a money that actually gets better over time. Who can believe such a thing? I mean, yeah, I'm getting the signal here, but let me just finish with something else. The implications of cryptocurrency for the culture and our society and for the economy are gigantic. We have all been shaped, our sensibilities, our economic behaviors, by the age of inflation. We always expect our money to be worth less and less and less in the future. We have a propensity to spend, to live in a state of debt all the time. That's the way we've been socialized. We've been socialized that way because our money is bad. It's made us overvalue material things and undervalue savings. I mean, people don't save anymore. Interest rates are zero. We're not rewarded for saving. So we live like assholes most of the time, actually. This is what central banking has done to us, So it's changed our culture and changed us as people. So if we start using cryptocurrency, it's going to change everything. When I say this, there will be some people in this room that will know exactly what I mean. You're holding on to Bitcoin, and you're in a position to spend it. You are very careful about how you use that, aren't you? Oh, yes. Yeah. It changes the way you look at the material world. You're looking around your house. You got a house full of stuff everywhere. Every once in a while, you sit down in your chair and you think, what if I sold all this for Bitcoin? That would be a smart thing. I mean, it happens, right? You think this way. So it changes our psychology. What it's going to do is cause us as a people and a culture to start thinking ever more long term. For the first time, like in generations, we're going to start thinking about the future. And that's an amazing thing. And what's that going to do to us economically? From an economics point of view, it means that we're going to start accumulating capital again. And capital is the basis for long-term economic planning, the expansion of the division of labor, and the expansion of prosperity itself. I mean, the end of the age of inflation taking place within the cryptography world is going to change us as people and restore prosperity, not just here, but around the world. Now, what about the parallel standards? Americans are freaked out by this idea that we'd have two currencies circulating simultaneously. We're the only people in the world that think this way. Most everybody else in the world is very happy to use 2, 3, 4, 5 currencies in one space. And it's true that Americans are pretty stupid about math, but actually I think that we can actually adapt to this system. It's going to take some struggle. Americans are totally freaked out by it. But we can do this. We can do this. So what will dollars be used for in the future, if not for the daily use of consumer spending and stuff like that? Well, dollars will be useful for collecting taxes. That's for sure. Dollars will continue to be useful for shoring up the banking system that's going to continue to be under pressure. And unstable. That's what I believe we're looking at over the next 25 years or so.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the 10th edition of SovereignBTC, your guide to the practical side of everyday Bitcoin use. Again, you can hear us on letstalkbitcoin.com and their podcast feed. You can now hear us on LRN.FM. That's a Liberty Radio network out of New Hampshire. You can check out their podcast feed. Wonderful website, wonderful programming. Of course, Free Talk Live plays on LRN.FM. That's a great Liberty program you can hear every single evening and on the weekends. I want to thank our sponsors, Bitmain Tech. That's bitmaintech.com. They're the ones that bring you the Antminer S1. I want to encourage you to check out our website, SovereignBTC.com. We also do a media marketing and consulting firm. We'd love to help you out with advertisements, Bitcoin videos, marketing, social media, and consulting on anything from mining to what would be good for your business as far as Bitcoin solutions. So that's at SovereignBTC.com. You can also like us on Facebook at Facebook.com/SovereignBTC and follow us on Twitter at Twitter.com/SovBTC. Before I log off, I want to remind you once more, use Bitcoin, live free, and prosper.